to visit the Center for the Study of Ethics website, where you can pull up the full schedule, where almost all of the sessions will be live streamed and recorded. So our first panel discussion for this week is on digital media in aviation ethics, and we're pleased to have faculty members from both of those areas. Emily Hendrick is an assistant professor of digital media here at UVU, and she'll be joined by Dan Sutliff, who is an assistant professor in aviation science. Did I get that correct?
Real close.
On both counts? Close enough? We will hear from them. They will engage their topics, and then we have questions that will be available. If you're tuning in on YouTube Live, you can type a question into the chat. And we also encourage you to complete the very short assessment survey that we have taped to the backs of the chairs here in the room, and then we'll also put it in the YouTube Live link. So without further ado, we'll turn the time over to Emily and Dan.
Okay, Dan, before we start, when they paired us together, first of all, I love aviation, but then I was like, the most controversial thing I have in aviation is the horrible economy seats. What are you guys going to do about that?
What do you mean, you guys?
You guys.
Dan, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Can you just hit the microphone super close?
Super close. Let's talk about those economy seats in any airline, as if you're in charge of it.
Well, why do you buy an economy seat?
It's true. I'm Comfort Plus, if I can.
I really don't have much to say about that. Yeah, they stink.
They do. It's almost like you should fly first class or private.
Oh no, we'll talk about that. Although an economy seat works well for a very short flight. There are some budget airlines, particularly in Europe, where the seats have very little padding and no pockets in the back of them and don't recline, but you're only there for 45 minutes, so nobody cares. And it's cheap. And it gets you from Florence to Paris, for example. Faster and a lot cheaper than the train.
No, it's true. I mean, our country is very much an aviation-driven country. We don't have, Europe's a great example of a train system, and I don't want to jump all over, but as I've been talking with you, you've made some really fascinating points about how, the way transportation has been growing in the United States, especially in dealing with climate change, and what do we do?
Well, yeah, we're on the path to address that. It's a big chore, and it's going to take a while. Things are going to get worse before they get better, climate change wise. Yeah, we could talk a lot about many aspects of that. A lot of things that are, well, I'll get into what's going on in the airlines.
Sure, let me try to help you with the slide.
And a little bit into what's going on in private aviation. Since we do have a little bit of a live audience here, I'll treat you like you're my class, and nobody wants to just hear me lecture, I'm sure. It wouldn't last very long if that's all I did. How many of you have heard of flight shaming?
Say that again.
Flight shaming. It's where people show up at the airport gate. This one looks like it's in Germany, probably Stuttgart, and try to shame passengers as they get on the airplane for flying instead of taking the train, for example. You don't see a whole lot of it in this country yet, but it's not unusual in Europe to see periodic protests, which are termed flight shaming. And the idea is that although aviation in a whole is not a huge contributor to climate change, about 2.5% to 3%, it's very visible And it's an easy target because it's so visible. And the idea is, why are these passengers participating in an activity that pumps tons of carbon into the atmosphere when we're trying to reduce carbon or eliminate carbon completely? So that's flight shaming. Watch out for it at an airport near you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk about public shaming as well on the digital media front. I actually have a slide. Actually, should I talk about it now?
Sure.
Yeah, from a digital media standpoint, I mean, we do this all the time. Remember a couple of years ago, there was a story where a doctor he refused to give up his seat on a United Airlines flight, and so they dragged him off. He had a black eye. They pulled him off the airplane, and it was a big controversy. And so the airlines, of course, they didn't get ahead of that story. They didn't own the narrative. But meanwhile, the internet, of course, attacked everybody against, United Airlines, like, this was horrible, you shouldn't have done that, because the airline overbooked flights. And we seem to have this happen a lot in domestic flights, is the overbooking. And it's frustrating. It's gotten rather frustrating to fly. A grosser example is just like a few weeks ago, the Delta airline. Did anybody remember this story? Where they force landed, or they had to turn around because it became a biohazard because somebody had an upset tummy and it got everywhere. Gross. I won't go into too many more details. But now Delta has this terrible reputation of that. And so we live in a public forum. With the advent of Web 2.0, which is social media and all that, people have democratized being able to speak out, which can be a wonderful thing. However, public opinion now, we can demonize businesses, brands, people, individuals, it doesn't matter. And so now, especially with aviation, I feel like they've had to step it up and making sure that they are on the good side with people. And so these headlines, they say there's no such thing as bad press. Apparently there is. And it's been fascinating to watch people's reactions and stuff. Poor United Airlines, if you want to say poor United Airlines. The memes were hilarious in a horrible way. But one was United Airlines, they have red eye and black eye flights. And just because that guy got punched. And so it's amazing what has happened with customers and everybody and their ability to respond quickly and shame people on flights. One last story. I was on a flight going somewhere, I don't remember. But what I do remember about that flight was a girl. I was in the window seat, Comfort Plus, so I've stepped it up in the world. And she had her shoes off, and her foot was on my armrest from behind. And there was a few times I rested my elbow, and I looked down, and I rested it on her foot. It was so disgusting. But I'm seeing these things around the subreddits and things where people are taking pictures and shaming others, individuals. Terrible passengers who just do stuff like that. She never got the hint. I kept resting my elbow, forgetting that her foot was there. I'll never unsee that anymore. So I hope that's okay.
You could offer to paint her toenails.
Oh, gosh.
Well, you bring up some interesting points, Emily, regarding the airliner that turned around because somebody was sick. Were people on social media, I imagine, did they have a problem with that?
Yeah. It really just it brought up a lot of questions about people being unfit to fly. The question of, was that a gross overuse of, do you have to force an entire plane down for that? But apparently the stench of, I'll just say it, he had diarrhea. The stench of everything was horrible, and it was not contained, that it was bad enough where they had to. But it didn't look good for Delta.
Well, when things like that happen, the crew's making a decision based on the best interest of the passengers. It may be inconvenient, but it might save their lives.
Yeah, and I think no one was going to complain about landing early after that stench, so.
An interesting thing to me is how people will complain about a flight that's delayed because of a maintenance issue. Well, do you really want to fly in an airplane that has something wrong with it? And do you have any idea how many moving parts there are on an airliner? And every one of them has to work, so that's also in your best interest. So complain away, we're not leaving the ground until it's safe to do so.
No, it's true. I remember I took a flight to Germany, and I thought I was going to fly on Lufthansa, and I was really excited about it, but it ended up being like Spirit, and it was so sad. Anyway, I landed in Germany, and I remember looking over and seeing a plane from Iraq, and it looked like it had been through a war zone in Iraq, and I just thought, oh, okay, at least my plane could probably get off the tarmac.
Okay, well, the next slide. Anybody heard anything about the banning of private jets on the news?
Well, I know that it seems like a lot of celebrities are under fire for using as many as they are. I mean, there's a whole Twitter account, or X, or whatever you want to call it now, where they're following Elon Musk's private plane, or Taylor Swift, for how often, she flies or whatever private. And so there's a lot of ridicule and hypocrisy, like Leonardo DiCaprio, who wants climate change yet probably flies private to these events, which is an interesting point.
Seems kind of ridiculous, I know. I made my living flying private jets, did that for 25 years. Stopped about 10 years ago when I became an academic, more or less. And I don't miss it. Never look back. But there is another side to be heard. I've flown a few of the rich and famous, and I've had conversations with them about flying private jets compared to flying on the airlines. And they've told me that if I get recognized in an airport, it's game over. The crowds accumulate, and I can't get to where I need to go, and other passengers are affected, and on and on and on. So that's their reasoning for justifying private aviation. And that's really not their fault, it's our fault as a hero-worshiping society, for lack of a better term. Why do we hold these people in such high esteem when all they do is, in front of a camera, pretend to be somebody else?
Oh, I am curious, though. I mean, a Cessna, for example, is far smaller than, I know they don't fly them very often, but a 747, for example. But how much of an impact does a private airlines make compared to commercial airlines?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me that.
Oh, I did not mean to debate that one. I was just curious.
Oh, no, it's not a debate. I'm actually on your side. I think it's one of those things I highlighted yesterday when I was going through my notes. Yeah, here we are. Private jet journeys, about 4 times more carbon per person, and about 800 times more than taking the train.
So when Chris Hemsworth flies...
And I'm not sure either of those are accurate, but...
So when Chris Hemsworth flies private to, like, shoot a movie or whatever, it's 4 times as much as if he, instead of him flying commercially?
At least.
It's okay. I saw on Reddit this morning
Yeah.
he did fly commercially. So
Good for him.
Thor's okay.
Good for him. Yeah, by comparison, it could be seen as incredibly wasteful. But again, aviation's total contribution to atmospheric carbon is a relatively small percentage of the whole. That doesn't mean that we don't need to do something. We do, and we are. But it's, it's like I said, it's a lot more visible than everybody we all have cars, and we all drive. And even those of us who drive electric cars, I don't yet. In Utah, where half of our electricity comes from burning coal, you might as well have a coal-burning car for half of your journeys.
No, that's a really good point. Well, and I think one of the fascinating things about the changes is I live in Lehigh, and from what I understand, our city council traveled to the Netherlands, and they wanted to see how the infrastructure there has been built. I visited a place called Utrecht, and it's just outside of Amsterdam, and they actively decided about 40 or 50 years ago they were no longer going to become a vehicle-centric city. They wanted to be a people-centric, and that means getting the vehicles out of the main parts of downtown, and so they embraced biking. So when we think of the Netherlands, we often think of windmills and bikes, or stroopwafel. And it was kind of cool to go around where you could just easily take a train, you're right there, and you're not going to get run over. And the cities are just a lot more freeing because of, or that particular city, because it's all by bikes. And I thought that was really cool. So Lehigh, I think, is setting out to create more bike paths to give communities access to Front Runner and being able to go up and down. For me, it's awesome. I just bike 1.83 miles. I have a little thing on my bike that tells me that. I hop onto Front Runner, I take it down, and I love that here at UVU we have a bridge, so it's easy for me to pop over. Now, if I were to try to do this in like some suburb of Salt Lake County, I'd be hosed or run over, most likely run over.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hate driving to main campus because it's so difficult. If I could take the train to main campus, I would. Unfortunately, I work at the airport, and train doesn't go anywhere near the airport, so I drive. We're considering starting a shuttle from the train station to the airport, in which case I would be able to take the train. So, yeah, I agree. What are the ethics of all of this travel we do, whether it's by air or highway or ship?
Yeah.
The shipping industry is actually the dirtiest of all.
Oh, I wouldn't even doubt it. Gosh, it's like I'm giving you my entire travel log. There was this really neat experience over at the Smithsonian where they talked about for how much boating traffic happens along our oceans, especially along California all the way up to Alaska. It's actually the radio frequencies and things like that have made it difficult for migratory animals like whales to communicate. It's just a bunch of white noise. And of course, you've got the pollutants that are happening. I mean, cruise ships, for example, are major polluters. I've never been on one, so out of absolute, environmental whatever, I say, I'm not going to do it, you big polluter, because, yeah, they just, I mean, all those people on one ship, and then it's just a lot of excess. Well, you know where my ethics stand on cruise ships.
Good for you. Well, we'll talk about that later. So that slide you see now is put up there to remind me of another talking point. France has legally banned some flights within the country that can be done within 2.5 hours by train. Now, there are a lot of loopholes, so it's not a lot of flights, but it's a start. And when you think about it, if you can go city center to city center by train in 2.5 hours, that's a whole lot faster than you could do it by plane when you consider driving to the airport, standing in line, and then getting from the airport at your destination to wherever you really need to go. It is faster and easier and much less polluting than doing it by plane.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely fell in love with European train system because it's easy to connect every city, and you don't have to deal with, okay, so you're in, let's say, Berlin. The airport to fly, the international one's like 30 or 40 minutes out of the city. So you have to get a taxi or find a way, and that has a cost to it, usually around 50 euro. And then you've got to deal with the lines and everything, and then making sure you're, if you're flying within Europe, to make sure that your bags are small enough. Otherwise, you're paying a fee on top of that. And it's a big pain. Or I could have taken a train to go from Berlin to, where was I going? Denmark, so Copenhagen. And I was able to get there in probably the same amount of time for easily half the cost. And so if I didn't mind just going from downtown to downtown, I actually saved money, and it may have cost me an extra hour or two in time. That's not a bad trade-off.
Do you know how fast those trains go?
I think the one I was on was like 200 miles per hour.
200 miles an hour, yeah.
Okay.
Faster than the airplanes we use at UVU to train airline pilots.
You're kidding me.
Yeah,
Oh,
a lot
man.
faster.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't feel like you're going that fast, too.
No, it
That's
doesn't. You
what's
can
funny.
stand up and walk around and go
Yeah.
to the bar car and get a drink and a snack.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And like the room, so I did first class because it wasn't even that much of a difference. I think it was like $20, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll do first class the one time in my life, and it's like cushy. I couldn't believe how relaxed it is. You get a full meal.
It'd be great if we had that option here, don't you think?
Ah, if only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. What's next?
Ooh, I remember you
Oh,
talking about
there's-
this one.
There's hope on the horizon. That doesn't look like well, it's an image. But I believe this airplane is flying. It's serial number 1, I think, of the Airbus A380, which is no longer being used for passenger transport. They're experimenting with hydrogen propulsion. And they actually have a hydrogen-powered jet engine attached to the rear of the fuselage with liquid hydrogen tanks inside. And they're trying to figure out how they can use hydrogen instead of fossil fuel to power long-range airliners. Electricity isn't really an option for anything that has to go that far, but hydrogen may be. And the only byproduct is water vapor.
That's incredible because I saw that Germany was experimenting with their buses using that same hydrogen technology, but I never thought about adapting it to an airliner. So in this case, how far are the flights going? Are they just a short city to city, or are they looking transcontinental?
Do you mean for hydrogen?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they're looking ultra long range.
You're kidding
Yeah,
me.
Yeah, because other fuels are an option for the shorter range flights, or will be. 500 miles within your lifetime, maybe not mine, you'll be seeing electrically powered small airliners.
Wow. So because the output is just water vapor, are we not going to see the chemtrails in the sky anymore?
Chemtrails.
I mean,
Is there really such a thing? Another topic. No, but you may see more clouds,
oh, okay.
which is something that we might have to consider. Yeah, we don't have all the answers.
Sorry, I had to throw a conspiracy theory in there.
What we have are a lot of questions, which is okay.
No, that's fascinating because, I mean, it seems like COVID, what happened was we couldn't travel, right? And then suddenly everybody wants to travel again, and everything's expensive to fly right now. And do you think something like this could maybe be expensive to start with, but then over time be actually more would it be less more economical for us to fly because of this technology?
Yeah, it's going to be expensive.
Okay.
And even more so in the beginning.
Oh, that makes
It's
sense.
going to take the economies of scale to bring the price down. You're going to have readily available huge quantities of hydrogen fuel, and it'll be a while before that happens. But is it worth it? Absolutely.
No, I think it's a good investment. With this particular technology, oh shoot, I lost my question. But I was thinking more along the lines of that shift in adoption and everything like that. But do you see, is the mileage going to be the same, or are we going to see faster results? Like, is it going to be, what's the famous airline that you could go from London to New York in like half the time as a regular
Oh,
commercial?
that's supersonic transport?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, no, that's not all it's cracked up to be,
Oh, okay.
to put it bluntly. You may see supersonic passenger airplanes again at some point in the future. I don't think they're going to amount to a lot of passenger carrying capability. It'd be hugely expensive. If your time is really worth that much, or you think it is, then go ahead and pay it. The rest of us will put up with a few more hours in the air.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool.
And not only are we looking at hydrogen power for fuels for airliners of the future, we're looking at radically new designs, much more efficient aircraft. Rather than a passenger tube with some wings bolted to it, let's make the whole airplane the shape of an airfoil and reduce the fuel consumption, increase the efficiency, and it's just a better way to do it. And now that we are becoming adept at building things out of composites, not everything has to be metal, we can design some more efficient shapes that are strong enough to carry the load and withstand the stresses and also be efficient.
Well, it's interesting how we're not doing more of the same. I think there's enough people out there that want change and to be more efficient. So something like the look and switching materials and things like that. I was in San Francisco last week, and I just took a lift from the San Francisco airport to downtown, and I looked over to my left, and there was a car driving next to me, and there was no driver. And I'm like, wait, what? And I looked at it, and it was one of the Waymo cars. So, I mean, it was a goofy-looking car because it was this nice white Jaguar SUV, but then there was all these components on it, cameras and sensors and everything like that. But the passenger was actually in the back seat, and then there was no driver or front passenger. And the Lyft guy was nice and rolled down the window so I could take a picture of it. But it brought up this question, would you be comfortable, I'll ask this, who would actually jump in a self-driving vehicle? Okay, you're definitely a no. Who would do it? You're like, I've lived my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair.
My days are numbered.
Yeah. So I actually tried to, but it's invitation only, so I wasn't able to actually book it going back. But that idea of trust. So what about an airplane like this? If you were flying to New York City and you get to your terminal and see a plane like this, would you go, that doesn't look right, I'm not getting on? Or would you go, yeah, let's do this?
I'm glad you brought that up. What about a plane that looks like that doesn't have a pilot?
Oh my gosh, one step further. Would you do that? Plane with no pilot.
Actually,
First flight, maybe, I don't know.
Actually, the pilotless airplane may come first. It's already been done. Do you know how much the pilots actually have to do on a trip from New York to London? Not much. If everything works right and the computer is programmed properly, They don't have to touch anything.
Okay, I'm going to bring up this question. Tell me if it's true or just a myth. With plane crashes that we see, which are significantly lower than, just regular driving traffic fatalities or anything, is it pilot error or is it mechanical error?
80% of the time, it's pilot error.
So if we took the pilot out of the airplane, they would actually get safer.
That's the question. There are also instances where the pilot has saved the airplane.
That's true too. Yeah. Is there a way, have they talked about it, where if they have a pilot-less aircraft, if something did happen, could somebody remote log in and be able to control it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
The flight would still be monitored
Okay.
by a operator, maybe not a pilot, somebody sitting on the ground. That dovetails nicely into the next few slides. Let's go through those so you have a chance to do your thing, shall we?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, sorry, your stuff's more interesting than mine.
Oh, I don't know. This is at the 30th Street heliport on the west side of Manhattan Island in New York, and this was just a few days ago. And interestingly enough, I was walking by there with my wife just a few days before this. And these protesters are objecting to the use of helicopters as private transport. Wasteful compared to taking a cab. Saves a lot of time for those who can afford it, but also pumps a disproportionate amount of carbon into the atmosphere. And that's their objection. Again, a relatively small percentage of the total, but very visible, noisy.
Yeah. Oh, you said this was in New York?
Yes.
See, that's what I wonder. If New York, instead of trying to figure out how to, move us from a street level to a 3D, airspace level, why don't they just have a couple of roads that are dedicated to bikes? And I mean, sorry, that probably sounded un-American.
No, I agree. They should. And it's happening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's slowly.
Yeah.
Slowly. But there are a lot more bike lanes in New York than there used to be. There are even more in Paris. They're a little bit ahead of us.
Yeah, Paris just put in a whole 8-year infrastructure. I believe they just wrapped up. They took a lot of the main areas between the most popular attractions, like the Eiffel Tower to the Louvre, and now it's completely pedestrian only. And so you can zip around on your bike just fine getting to the biggest touristy areas. Like, how cool is that?
Watch out for the electric bikes.
That's true.
You can step off the curb and you notice that there's a bicycle a couple of blocks away. But if it's an electric bike, it can be on you before you're across the street.
Yeah.
And a lot of the buses there are electric too.
Yeah.
Silent killers.
No,
You
Oslo.
can't hear them coming.
Oslo, I think, has the most Teslas per capita, and I remember not looking because I didn't hear them, and I stepped off the curb and almost got clipped by a Tesla. I'm like, that's a good death. I could accept that one.
Yeah, we have to learn better ways to cross the street, or different ways to cross the street.
It's true.
Okay, there are answers to this problem too. Oh, yeah. Next slide.
Oh, sorry. Got ahead of you.
Instead of helicopters, instead of oil-burning helicopters, how about electrically powered vertical takeoff and landing aircraft? That's not a fantasy. That aircraft exists. It's flying now. It's autonomous. It has no pilot. When they go into service, actually carrying passengers, there will be a pilot on board for the first several years of operation, just because nobody wants to get on it without a pilot until we learn that the technology is perfectly capable of doing the job without a human on board at the controls. There will be a human on the ground monitoring everything and able to take over if necessary. But this is the future of short-range travel for the one percenters, so to speak. The goal is to make this affordable, so it's no more expensive than a taxi cab. Not sure it'll ever happen, but they come closer than you'd think.
From a consumer level, I am curious if this was affordable as a regular new car, would you consider having this be your transport or commuter to work? If you were able to just pull this out of your garage, fly, and then have a landing pad somewhere on campus, would you consider doing this route? Or are you like, no, I'll just stick with my car?
Depends on how many other people have those vehicles, right?
Yeah.
It get pretty crowded in the air.
That's true, yeah. I mean, you definitely, I'm guessing they'll have like certain highway airspace that you have to cruise on, not just willy-nilly anywhere.
Well, they're not designed to be personal vehicles necessarily.
Not yet.
but- Not yet.
Come on.
Not yet.
Have you watched
They'll
the
be-
sci-fi
they'll-
shoot?
They'll be like Ubers.
Yeah.
And you won't be able to take off in your driveway.
Yeah. Fine. I'm trying to live this new world, Dan. I want it so bad.
You used to watch the Jetsons, didn't you?
I did watch the Jetsons.
There's the same thing in takeoff and landing mode. Takes off and lands vertically. Once off the ground, flies horizontally at a high rate of speed, and lands again vertically, and relatively silently, too. You could, if there were one doing this right out there in the parking lot right now, you wouldn't be able to hear it.
That's incredible. So the propellers look like they're now vertical, so they adapt based off of your movement. That's cool. But you kind of stole my thunder with telling me that it's not for me to buy a personal aircraft.
Well, not that one. And I put that in there because I knew that at this point it would be your turn.
Oh, yeah, drones. That's been kind of my world. So in digital media, we've been using drones for all sorts of things. My main thing, of course, is aerial cinematography. So if you watch any Netflix show or really anything now, it seems like that first establishing shot is high above just a slow-moving establishing shot, right? That's most likely done from a drone, because in the past they used helicopters, but that's expensive. And I mean, you definitely still see it depending on the airspace and locations, but drones have definitely taken over. The other reason I use them is digital preservation. So our program got really good at doing what we call digital twins. So 3D reproductions of artifacts, like archaeology artifacts. But then the question was, could we do entire sites? And so I don't have any slides on that, but now we're able, through the use of drones, we're able to create digital twins and then create reproductions of what it used to look like. So one example, if you indulge me, is we had a project with St. Augustine. It's the oldest Spanish historic fort in the United States. It's out in Florida, and it's like from the 1500s. It's probably one of the oldest European-influenced sites in the United States. And the question is, with the impacts of climate change, is that particular fort that's right on the coast going to be impacted? So what we were able to do is, through the use of drones and collecting LiDAR, so point cloud data, we could take that and put it in Unreal Engine 5. Now that's a game simulation software, so anybody who loves Call of Duty and all that, if it's not done in Unity, it's done in Unreal. And we're able to take that, and then using all the game physics, we can show what a hurricane could impact, what water rises levels can look like. So this project, we're eventually, hopefully, showing it to Congress so they can actually see, okay, this is what's going to happen in 50 years if, the data is showing us this. And it's fascinating because at some point we can't just make it up. We use drones to do half the work to be able to fly around. So it's quite fascinating to use these tools in our projects. Okay, I'm going to attempt to move to my slide deck, but it's on a PC, so I don't know how to use PCs very well. Oh my gosh, look at me. I do know how to use them. Nailed it. Okay, I didn't mean it for it to be self-indulgent, but that's a picture of me. So why was I in San Francisco last week? I went for the sourdough bread. Just kidding. But not really. There was a really cool event, Skydio. It's an American-based company out in San Mateo, California. They had an event called Ascend. And I held their new X-10 drone. This thing is beautiful. Okay, I didn't just hold it, I flew it. Now, what's cool about this particular drone, if you permit me to geek out so much about this, because I want our school to get one, it has a new thing called Night Sense. And so there's all these little cameras on top of the computer, and it uses artificial intelligence. So anyone who's flown a drone, they're pretty dumb. You fly, and if you get close to an object, it just abruptly stops. But through the use of AI, it will automatically move around. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, when you start adding a thing called Night Sense, you can put it in underground conditions like subway systems. So if you have people who are checking in on infrastructure, it can go in the dark, cruise around, and not run into anything, but make sure that there's no danger for any worker that's down there. So how I'm going to use it is for the Bitleahy archaeology project, there's a lot of underground pieces. I can take that drone, put it underneath, and then that whole cave infrastructure, we're able to do 3D maps with it. And I don't have to worry about the drone freaking out and running into a wall, because we damaged a lot of drones doing that, because it's 20 feet below limestone. But that brings up an interesting area that kind of dabbles in our space, aviation, and engineering and technology, which is our college. The question of automation and the use of drones. So we're seeing the workforce in infrastructure, they're getting older, and a lot of that skill set is disappearing, unfortunately, and they have fewer people to replace those jobs. So do you try to hire more people, or do you have smarter tools like drones? So imagine in the top right, imagine having, what do you call it when cities, the power grid? Yeah, the generators?
Yeah.
Yeah, generators. They have these docks now where you could have a drone in there, and somebody back at the office, if they needed to check something, they can remote pilot it, look around with the drone, and check things. They can also use these particular drones to fly around high bridges. Imagine the Golden Gate and having to check to make sure there's no rust spots. Well, how would they normally do it? They dangle some dude over the bridge, and he's in his little bucket, looking for the...
Or chasing criminals and dropping a net on them.
Yeah, it's true. There's so many applications, and yet these drones now have gotten so great with their cameras, they're able to get really close proximity without endangering anybody, really. And so it's pretty fascinating. And then, of course, you've got companies like, Walmart, Kroger, Amazon, of course, DHL. They're looking at delivery services using drones, and I believe they're working on a drone highway within Salt Lake, certain airspace that's allocated.
There's drone delivery in Salt Lake right now.
I didn't know they did
Medical
it.
supplies, yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
You heard of Zipline?
No.
Ooh, check it out.
Okay, zipline. So, I mean, the use of it is fascinating, but I'm curious. So I do fly enough drones. I didn't bring it here, but when you see somebody flying, do you think their camera's on and they're watching me? Like, I'm curious if it's a privacy issue, or do you not care?
There's no privacy anymore anyway. I don't care.
It's true.
I bought a drone recently, and I was flying it around, and I wasn't trying to invade people's privacy, but I was worried they were thinking that. Because I was flying around my neighborhood, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not worried about it, and I wasn't doing that. But I thought, well, others might be thinking I'm trying to get these pictures.
Oh, yeah. No, I have a neighbor who I was testing out a drone kind of near their house, but not really. And their kids freaked out because it was a larger drone. And the the sound of it scared their children, and so I get this hate text message saying, "You scared my children," and I'm like, "Oh gosh, I didn't mean to do that." Like, so should I have put a warning out to my entire neighborhood that I was flying?
Oh, we need to talk. I owe my neighbors for keeping me awake until midnight on 4th of July and New Year's Eve and July 24th with their fireworks.
Till midnight. See, that's just being
And after,
unneighborly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about what I can do with the drone
Yeah.
to my neighbors.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if I ever wanted to test a drone, I either text them and let them know I'm flying, which I think is unnecessary, but I do it out of courtesy, or I go to a park nearby. But even then, what I've done, I have a Part 107, and so legally I can fly, and I stay within the rules. I have cones that I put out. I have my landing pad. I even have the dorkiest vest that says FAA pilot, just so they leave me alone. But I don't know what it is. 14-year-old boys always come up to me, "What kind of drone are you flying?" "I have a drone. Can I fly yours?" I'm like, "You want to fly my $20,000 drone? No, go away." And so they kind of invade my space, but they think it's like a video game too. I'm like, "No, I'm actually doing work. Go away."
So how much does that thing cost, the one that you want UVU to buy?
Ooh, that's about a 20 grand drone. So it's not the most expensive.
Well, let's get a
one.
couple of them.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a game changer.
Tell them I said it was okay.
Okay, I will.
All right.
You heard it here. But yeah, no, the X10, oh, what a beauty. This is going back to that earlier, the shaming part. There's some headlines. I have a friend who works for Delta, and he said, back in 2021, people weren't happy about masking up. People weren't exactly cordial at that point. And it seems like, honestly, dare I say, empathy has deteriorated. We have shorter fuses, it seems like, as a society. And it was interesting because what he said was that it was already May of 2022. It was May of 2022, and he said that they've already reached the same amount of complaints that they've usually do by May instead of the full year. So they have double the amount of unruly passengers and things like that. And I think it's a widespread issue with with just, aviation in general. People get frustrated.
I think it's humanity in general.
That's true. You're not wrong. But I think, the cost where you're being nickeled and dimed for luggage, the long waits, sometimes the just overbooked flights, being bumped. Of course, there's a pilot shortage right now. And so you just never know on time and everything like that. It's reliable, but it's not what it was. Do you ever look at like the old TSA, like the 60s of what it used to look like? And I just think that those days are gone.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Oh my gosh, right? And if anybody has any questions, I'm just going. Okay, this is like an interesting concept. You were like, what does tractors have to do with any of this, Emily? So the top left is an example of a tractor that uses artificial intelligence to identify weeds. So farmers can put this contraption on their tractor, and as they're plowing their fields, if there's something that does not look like a crop that they want, it zaps it. So it will identify it, and then it'll send a squirt of herbicide or pesticide or killicide on there and get rid of it. Now, I think that's a really cool use case of using artificial intelligence to identify problems. It's working smarter, not harder. But then there's an interesting whole controversy around AI and this post 9/11 world. So Clearview AI is a company that basically scraped the internet of images, collected it, and using artificial intelligence, they were able to create a super robust facial recognition software. And of course, there's plenty of applications, but one of their big clients is the police department. So think about racial profiling and things like that, and the ethics behind that. Is it okay? You know, how many people in this room do remember a pre-9/11 airport? You could carry a water bottle. You could keep your shoes on. You didn't get set aside every 10 people to get something inspected. It was a different time, right? But it was also a different world. But racial profiling, I mean, I have a friend who, I think he just has that resting scowly face. We won't say RBF. But he's one of those guys that just looks scowly, and his hair and everything, he always gets pulled away from security. He's the guy, I'm like, don't make it worse. And then he does, and I'm like, now they're carrying you to the back room. You know what happens back there. Anyway, but that exists, right? Perhaps there's a bias as well. And that's really a moral question I ask in my intercultural class is it okay? Is racial profiling okay? I don't know. There's pros and cons to it. But then you have, as far as facial recognition, think about what happened in Hong Kong. So China is really big on security, right? But in Hong Kong, during the protests and everything like that, they wanted to use facial recognition. And what did China implement? That whole social credit idea, being able to, I can't travel if my social credit's low. I got to make sure I'm the best Chinese citizen possible. And so if I'm happen to be walking through this event and it uses facial recognition, my score could go down. And meanwhile, I can't travel or visit my family out of the country or anything like that. So I don't know. Is America moving towards this idea because technology is affordable and acceptable? Or because law enforcement's using it? I'm curious what everybody else thinks. Or not.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot.
That's a big one. Facebook, you are not the customer, you are the product,
Yeah.
something like that.
Oh, it's true.
Yeah.
How does everyone feel about their digital footprint? There's a cautionary tale. I'm curious, those who are born after 9/11, who has a social media account? What is it, if you don't mind me asking? What social media are you willing to be on?
I use Instagram, but
You're on the gram, okay.
only for, I don't post anything personal on there. It's just for my art stuff. My art stuff.
Oh, cool. So you look but not post.
I post my art.
Oh, you post your
I
art.
don't post my face often.
You mean you're not an influencer?
No.
Looking, yeah, just for the gram?
Yeah.
Who else would like to share? What are you on?
I have an Instagram and LinkedIn, but I do post my face. I just don't really post a lot of
Yeah, LinkedIn is professional. Yeah, Instagram. I feel like any TikTokers in here, it's okay. We'll judge you. Nah. Do they have their best interest at heart? Do you think Facebook or Meta cares about you, or do they? What do you think their agenda is? Do they have an agenda? Their original motto was "Do no evil." How'd that go? Yeah. Or was that Google? Not any better. For those who are older, what's your social media of choice? Yeah.
Twitter and LinkedIn.
Twitter and LinkedIn. You're not calling it X yet?
Oh, right.
I know, right? I refuse to call it X. That's dumb. Yeah, so what about Twitter? How do you...
I've found there are ethical, considerations because I use it both for work and personally, and I don't share as much as I used to, my kids' names that I don't put up there, boy and girl, and when I travel, I used to, want to share where I was and what I was doing, and I've kind of gone away from that. Now I travel, when I get home, I might post, but I don't want to post in real time.
Yeah,
You don't want anyone to know you're not at home.
Right.
it's true.
Among other things. Yeah.
Well, does anybody remember, what was it called? Was it Foursquare or something like that? Way back in the day where it was a geography-based thing where if you checked in enough times, eventually Facebook adopted that same feature and then killed the company. because that's what they do. Anyway, when people would travel, they would post where they're at, and then people would rob their homes because they're like, well, they're not home. So, because it's showing that they're in Greece. So if they're not home, let's go to their house. So there were some pretty tech-savvy burglars, which is kind of funny. You wouldn't have expected that. But going along the lines of Twitter and some of these, I mean, I talked about briefly the democratization of speech, right? In the old days, when the 90s and older, Web 1.0, you publish something and you're usually like a New York Times, and it's what you see is what you get. You consume it. But then Web 2.0, so around the 2000s, we were able to start seeing blogs, social media. All of a sudden, this concept of an influencer, for better or for worse, mostly for worse, showed up. And now anybody has an opinion. So there's a lot of noise that's happening, right? So how do you know what information is right? How do you know that when you're reading the headlines, it's legitimate and not just clickbait? Yeah, these are just some of the things that I've grappled with. Oh, Dan?
I'm just going to say, good question.
Yeah.
I don't.
You don't?
I have a tendency to trust major news sources, but maybe that's misplaced.
No, I think you're actually right, is that you look at the legacy brands, the ones that have been around for decades, and they're probably the most trusted that you can do. Your Aunt Becky, who's posting things on Facebook about things that she randomly found, can you trust her over the New York Times?
I got talked into Facebook several years ago.
It's not
and
a
I've
drug.
I've gotten to the point now where I don't have any friends. And I like it that way because I don't care what you had for lunch.
It's true. I had to really pull back actually with the 2016 election. That got too much for me. And as I talk to students, they are so over the news and how depressing it is too, that they don't want to be as active in this space anymore because it's so dystopian what we see and everything. But is that reality? I don't know. I have to admit, as I've been in digital media and probably been one of the causes of these problems, I really started questioning, am I going to be contributing to this cycle? Am I teaching the tools to these students of how to manipulate people and to be able to make things more addicting? I mean, how often are we on our phones? Like standing in a line, do we just stand there and just soak in their environment, or are we pulling out our phones? It's almost involuntary, right?
I find myself going down these rabbit holes on my phone, and it takes me a few minutes to realize that I'm being used. but when I do, I put my phone away until the next time.
It's true. Well, one thing that changed in the way that we consume things is honestly what companies get out of us. They want our time. They don't, yeah, money's great and everything. They have money. They want our time. But think about where your resources are. If you're reading the news, are you using an aggregator? So think, I don't know, Apple News, or in my case, I love the drudge of the internet called Reddit. And so my consumption is coming from things that have my own interests. It's no longer me getting a New York Times newspaper or an LA Times or something. It may just be part of one bigger tool of many things. And because of that, how long does it mean that you're spending with each individual brand? And so they don't like that. They want you to be all consuming, eating all their stuff all the time. But they've got to share with everybody else that you're following, right? So it's kind of an interesting shift that we've seen in about the last 15 years. Okay, this one's an interesting one about deep fakes. So we had a wonderful guest speaker on campus a few weeks ago, Jennifer Howell. And she works on she works with a studio that does deep fake for Hollywood. Now, we all know what's happening. Well, maybe you don't. The SAG-AFTRA strikes, I think they're running close to getting a deal finally, but one of their big sticky points is AI and how they're using it. So imagine you're a background actor. You go to a set and you're in it, you get paid a couple of bucks for the day, it's awesome, you're in a movie, there's Tom Cruise, or deepfake Tom Cruise, we'll talk about him in a second, and you're in it. But then afterwards, after they get the shot, they pull you off to the side and you get into a camera booth and they get you from all angles, and then you move on with your life. You're like, that's great, got my paycheck, that's awesome. A couple months later, another movie comes out and you happen to notice in the background they used your likeness, but they didn't pay you for it. Is that okay? Through the use of AI and the ability to reproduce people in background scenes, so it just doesn't look like, oh, Hollywood's used tons of tricks, inflating fake people in the background, getting tight shots with only a certain group. Did anybody watch Ted Lasso? They have to do a lot of stadium scenes and stuff, so every other person, you have to look really hard, but they're fake, or they're CGI'd, right? But now the studios own your likeness, but you're not getting paid for it every time they use your likeness. Is that fair?
No.
That's the answer. Studios are saying, yeah, it is. You signed a contract. We own your likeness for life. How unfair is that? Interesting, huh? So we'll see what they end up coming up with. But I definitely fall on the side of actors get paid for the project. And anyway, so deep fake is a really interesting thing. So the work that Jennifer Howell's doing, they take an active role in making sure not to abuse that power. So deepfake Tom Cruise is hilarious. If you've ever watched him, he kind of mildly looks like Tom Cruise, but through deepfake technology, he knows how to do the mannerisms and everything like that. And so he's up front. He's a comedian to show he could just be the most eccentric Tom Cruise lookalike possible. So that's kind of funny. But think about how deepfake is being used with Hollywood and being able to bring people back into the story. So with the approval of the estates, for example, Carrie Fisher passed away in the second sequel, Star Wars? I don't even know which one we're at now. Star Wars, I don't know. And so her character wasn't done with the story. So they had a couple of stand-ins, but I think one of them included her daughter. And she was able to, they were able to put Princess Leia's face back onto the actor and do that. Think about de-aging. Did anybody see the latest Indiana Jones? How do you feel about it? It's always like, I liked it or I thought it was horrible. Who thought Harrison Ford looked good as de-aged? Okay, you're like, no. Who thought it actually looked pretty good? I thought it did. All right, I guess I'm the only one. That's fair. But that de-aging and being able to tell stories in a way that it doesn't look fake through makeup, which is kind of neat. But then Paul Walker, he passed away. And with the latest, I don't even know which Fast and the Furious it is, 87? I don't know what we're at. His brother stood in for, so his brother's on the left, he stood in for Paul Walker, and they were able to put Paul's face and in character. So I think having this ability can definitely continue telling stories. However, you could certainly abuse it. Imagine, again, Aunt Becky, who falls for any misinformation. What if they did a deep fake President Biden or Vladimir Putin or something and deep faked a threat or something like that, and then that goes viral? How many people will start believing it? It goes back to that old story. Sorry to lecture, I didn't mean to do that. Remember, has anybody heard the War of the Worlds and Orson Welles story? And this happened like almost 100 years ago. And they did a really cool dramatization of War of the Worlds on the radio. Well, people out in the Midwest thought they were literally being invaded by aliens. They started hopping in their car, the phone lines were all tied up, and they're running away. Meanwhile, this was just a broadcast coming out of what,
There were
Chicago?
probably some New Yorkers that fell for that, too.
Yeah, fair. It was mostly the Midwest, though. And they had to apologize because they scared basically a ton of American citizens with a dramatization. In some ways, it's an allegory of what's happening today, that we create a lot of information and misinformation, that we're not disseminating it enough that what's the real headline. But I hope that at the end of the day, we don't get cynical, that we just dismiss all news, that we, dismiss anything that we hear, that if anything, we educate ourselves and just be smarter about it. I think that's my best advice for anybody who wants to navigate this very complicated digital media world. Well, we do have a few minutes. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Just a quick word on the ethics of air travel. Yeah, it is a contributor to climate change. As other industries get cleaned up, it'll be a larger contributor to climate change. It's going to be very difficult to decarbonize long-range flights, although it's possible. We'll do it. We have to keep traveling. Ethically, we have to keep traveling. We have to be aware of other peoples and other cultures and other ways of living and other ways of thinking. We can't live in a vacuum. So let's keep traveling and let's continue to do it cleaner.
No, I agree. I'm probably one of those people that are trying to make it so that you attend everything virtually, right? But at the same time, there's a human component to all of us, and we do need to get outside of ourselves. There's convenience, sure, but it's good to get out of the house every so often. Yeah.
Yeah, on that topic of personal aircraft and personal vehicles, private jets, even if we move entirely to electric vehicles and hydrogen-powered aircraft, isn't there still an ethical problem with, the elite being able to fly places in their private jets and the rest of us having to, get crammed on an airline?
I don't know. Is there? Is it a question of ethics that some people can afford to do things that others can't? That's a big question, Owen.
That was a non-answer. Yeah, I think it'll, yeah, that's a good question. I would think yes, given, well, it has to be. I mean, if you have the money and you have the ability to travel, why not? But maybe public opinion will sway you not to. Maybe it'll be cool. I mean, remember when the Prius first came out and a bunch of celebrities started buying Priuses? Instead of their really fancy, BMWs or Mercedes or whatever, they were all getting a Prius. I mean, it's funny how far it's come since people make fun of them now. But their gas mileage is awesome for LA, so maybe it's some of that too.
Mm-hmm.
This was a very enjoyable session. Thank you both very much for this. I really enjoyed what you had to say. I want to go back to some of the first things you talked about with public shaming. And my question for you is, do you think there's an ethical, what for you in your mind, what is an ethical way to protest bad behavior, whether it's from an airline, bad behavior of an airline or airline staff or other passengers, the ethical way to protest bad behavior? How would you respond to that?
I think the right to assembly is guaranteed in the Constitution, and we should be able to protest it in any way we choose. I think the danger is not in how to protest it. The danger is in not being permitted to protest it.
Well, I meant that was more in terms of like digital media to shame people, right, to dox them and think. Are those ethical ways of protesting bad behavior?
I'm all for, the First Amendment and being able to do that, but you're right. The problem I have with social media is the access is so instantaneous now that people just want to just jump in before they have all the facts, especially. Now, as far as the woman that put her foot on my armrest, still grossed out by that. For me, I didn't take a photo or send it to my friends or anything like that, and I certainly didn't post it on any social media. If anything, I gave her a glare. I did do that. I'm still human. But I think it's just speaking to the flight attendant and doing that. Now, if there is a bigger issue, then in the case of Dr. Dow and the United Airlines incident, I don't know if I would have been one of those people that would have live streamed it, for example. But here's a really tough one. In the case of George Floyd, think about that person who recorded his death, being able to do that. The person, she got so much ridicule for that. However, it was a huge damning piece of evidence of what was happening. So we have to weigh it with our ethical responsibility of time and place, and knowing that we have the wisdom to act appropriately, but not do it just out of the likes and just the thumbs up from people. We want to do it because it's the right thing to do. So it's not really a great answer, but that's, I guess, my answer.
So, Owen, I'm still thinking about your question. So, good job, dude.
Are we good for time?
We have one online,
Oh, yeah, sure.
The question from YouTube says, if pilotless aircrafts were to become mainstream with controllers on the ground, wouldn't that leave airplanes susceptible to hacked interference?
That's a good question for you, Emily.
That's it. Well, they say cybersecurity is one of the most dangerous areas for us right now. Yes, absolutely. Hackers, I mean, there are redundancies and things like that. Think the banking systems and whatnot. But, I mean, shoot, Disney Plus launched and it got hacked within, 2 weeks? So, but not, I mean, that's Disney. I would think that they would be able to lock it down, but trust me, there's certainly ways to get around it, and that would be a danger. It's no different than our infrastructures, our train systems and things like that. It's scary to think about, but it exists on a more widespread level.
That's one reason it won't be happening right away.
Thanks to both of you.
Let's throw in a George Floyd.